Welcome to my channel, where every story pulls you into a new mystery. Every case tests your instincts, and every clue brings us one step closer to the truth. In today's case, we follow Hercule Poirot as he investigates a strange house where a window stands shattered, yet not a single shard of glass can be found. The locals whisper of curses, reflections that move on their own, and a voice that calls from behind the empty frame. Stay with me till the end, because what Poirot discovers behind that broken window isn't a man, a trick, or a ghost. It's something far more human and far more horrifying. So, pick up your cup of tea and get comfortable, because today's case is worth every second, until the very end. Chapter 1. The Broken Window with No Glass. It began on a brittle afternoon in March, when the air outside carried that precise chill peculiar to early spring, the kind that pretends to have left winter behind, but still carries its breath on its tongue. The sky above Cornwall was a pale and indecisive gray, and the sea below Pendron Point churned like an unsettled mind. High above the cliffs, standing like a grand spectator to the unrest below, was Windward Court, an estate carved from weather-worn stone and surrounded by gnarled black pines. It had once been a lighthouse keeper's manor, long before its turrets were expanded and its grounds civilized. Now, it played host to something altogether more delicate than tides and storms, the art of refined society, eddy and family friction. Lady Viola Whitcomb, recently widowed, somewhat theatrical, and entirely unpredictable, was throwing a week-end gathering in honor of her late husband's birthday. A curious choice, some might say, to commemorate the dead with laughter and champagne. But Lady Viola, for all her brooding widow's garb and serpentine pearls, had never been known for sentiment. She was known for her money, her eccentric tastes in house decor, each room a different color scheme, and her curious interest in collecting people with secrets. The guest list included an odd mixture of family, friends, and one silent investor in the Whitcomb shipping line, whose presence seemed to unsettle the rest. There was her stepdaughter, Iris, sharp-eyed and suspiciously well-informed on everyone's business. Major Duncan Albright, a retired officer with a prosthetic hand and stories no one trusted. Miss Evelyn Marrow, a pensive painter from London who had once been engaged to the deceased Mr. Whitcomb and still wore sorrow like a second skin. And Edward Troughton, a young entrepreneur whose fortune had mysteriously ballooned after Harold Whitcomb's death. At precisely 4:02 in the afternoon, during tea in the Crimson drawing room, a sharp scream shattered the brittle calm. It came from the east wing, a part of the manor closed to guests, housing little more than Harold's old study and Lady Viola's private observatory. By the time they reached the corridor, the wind howled through the shattered frame of a once grand bay window. Glass crunched underfoot, yet curiously there were no shards of it inside the room. Only outside. Lady Viola stood, arms stiff by her sides, just beyond the gaping window, her black veil fluttering as if in mourning for some unseen loss. Behind her, in the center of the circular study, lay a man's body, dead, face down, and a single line of blood trailing toward the polished floorboards. Drawn as neatly as a signature, Colonel Montmere, the local magistrate, was among the guests and took immediate charge. "No one leaves the premises," he barked, his voice commanding but uncertain. This was no accident. It was not the shattered window that disturbed them most, nor even the corpse, which Lady Viola identified as Gregory Sharp, the silent investor whose exact relationship to her late husband had always remained undefined. What truly rattled them was the unnatural order of the room. Nothing was disturbed. The papers on the desk were aligned with near geometric precision. A pencil rested, unsharpened, beside a closed inkpot. Not a book displaced from the shelves, nor a chair askew. Only the broken window, and no trace of a stone or object that might have broken it, and no glass on the inside. As the rain began to fall fine and misting, like a curtain drawn over the sky, Lady Viola stepped forward. "You'll want someone clever," she murmured, as though to herself. "Someone who understands people more than footprints." By evening, a message had been sent to London. And 2 days later, Hercule Poirot arrived, his mustache glistening with pomade, his shoes gleaming like a mirror to the soul, and his little gray cells already turning. "Ah," he said, upon stepping into the crimson drawing room, and letting his gaze fall upon the broken frame of the window. "Already, I see the problem." He did not elaborate. Outside, the sea continued to rage. Inside, someone among them had killed a man, and had done so without leaving a mark on the room, or a single piece of glass behind. And Poirot, without yet speaking to a soul, had begun to see the threads hidden in the fog. One of them had lied already, and that lie, Poirot knew, would be the first crack in the polished mask of Windward Court. The affair at the broken window had begun. Chapter 2. The first Clust study had been sealed upon the discovery of Gregory Sharp's body, and it was not until Hercule Poirot had completed his preliminary walk of the grounds, pausing often to stare at things others would not consider odd. A rake leaned against a shed, a damp scarf draped over a garden bench, a row of boot prints muddled beyond meaning by rain, that he entered the room where death had occurred. "I prefer to see things with fresh eyes," he said softly to Colonel Montmere, who hovered behind him with folded arms. "Even if the eyes of others have muddied the scene." Poirot stepped over the threshold, his polished shoes avoiding the small yellow chalk marks made by the constable the day prior. The room smelled faintly of lemon oil and salt. The sea pressed against the cliffs below with a steady hush-hush of retreating tide, and a fresh wind coiled through the broken window like a patient snake. The body had been removed, of course, but its memory lingered. Poirot stood where he had lain, center of the circular room, just in front of a mahogany writing desk. He crouched slowly, peering at the pale stain of blood still visible in the grain of the floorboards. He took from his pocket a small magnifying lens and examined the area with utter stillness. "There's no sign of a struggle," Montmere offered after a time. "No broken furniture, no overturned chairs." "None," Poirot agreed. "But look here, this dark mark." Montmere leaned in. "A scuff. Not merely a scuff. A pressure mark. The kind left by someone standing in place, perhaps turning slightly, as if unsure whether to flee or stay. It is faint, but then, so is guilt in its earliest bloom." He rose and turned to the window. The glass had shattered outward, undeniably so. There were still fine crystalline shards scattered on the hedgerow below. But inside, clean to clean. "You see," Poirot said, "what is broken must always leave a trace of itself behind. But this glass has behaved like a polite ghost. It fled entirely, without so much as a shimmer left upon the rug." "Curious." Nest's pause. Montmere said nothing, uncertain whether Poirot was being rhetorical. Poirot stepped closer to the pane. "It was not broken from within. That much I am certain of. And yet no object was found below. Not a stone, not a bottle, not even a bird." He sniffed delicately. "No scent of oil, as from a bullet. No residue of fireworks or acidic propellants. The window broke, but not by visible force. It could have been pre-weakened," Montmere offered. "A fracture, widened by wind." Poirot made a soft, non-committal noise. Then he turned his attention to the desk. Lady Viola had mentioned Gregory Sharp was meant to meet with her that afternoon in the study, but had gone in early, seeking solitude. He was found some 15 minutes after she'd last seen him heading up the stairs. The door had been ajar, the wind howling at least, according to Iris, the stepdaughter who'd raised the alarm. Poirot opened the desk drawer. Empty. The lower drawer was locked. Montmere stepped forward. "We haven't opened that yet. Her ladyship claims she hasn't the key." "Ah," said Poirot. "But keys are less clever than they think." He removed a small brass pick from his coat pocket and, with a few quick motions, produced the satisfying click of a turning lock. Inside was a single folded document. Poirot did not touch it with his fingers. Instead, he extracted a small handkerchief and lifted it gently. "Mon Dieu," he said softly. It was a contract, a shareholder transfer agreement, and though much of it was in dense legal jargon, two things stood out. Gregory Sharp's name was scrawled in shaky ink across the bottom side, and dated 3 days prior. The space for the second signature was blank. It had been meant for Lady Viola, and yet she claimed she had no knowledge of this. Poirot murmured. Montmere frowned. "She told me Sharp was merely here for social reasons, that his business role was a ghost of a past chapter." Her words. Poirot's eyes glittered. "I do not like ghosts, Colonel, especially ones that try to buy silence with signatures." He replaced the contract carefully, relocked the drawer, and then paced a slow circle around the room. His eyes landed on a single painting seemingly out of place amid the otherwise traditional decor. It was a modernist piece, all harsh slashes of red and black and a single gray triangle at its center. "Tell me," Poirot said, gesturing to it, "who chose this painting?" "Lady Viola. Hung it there just last month. Claimed it kept her late husband from haunting the study." "Curious," Poirot said again. "She mourns him in black lace and pearl drops, yet fills the room with symbols of discord." He turned back to the desk. "There is one chair too many." "What?" Poirot pointed. 3 chairs, one behind the desk, one across from it, and one by the window, facing inward. Montmere frowned. "I hadn't noticed." "Ah, but noticing the unnoticed is what makes the detective valuable." Poirot examined the arm of the window-facing chair. A single fingerprint, smudged, but too high for a maid dusting. Montmere stepped forward uneasy. "You think the killer sat here?" "No," Poirot said simply. "I think someone watched. Outside." The wind whispered again. Poirot folded his hands behind his back. "There is something wrong here, Colonel. Something that is not about finance or even revenge. Something that hides in posture, in silence, in the roles we pretend to play for others. Someone in this house is not who they pretend to be." He turned toward the door. "I would like to speak with each guest, alone, one by one. Not in their rooms, no, here, in the study. Let them feel the presence of the crime. Let us see who avoids the bloodstain, who sits in which chair, and who mentions the glass." "Very well," Montmere said. Poirot gave a small bow. "It begins, mon ami, and already, I sense, not the identity of the murderer, but the shape of their lie." He glanced one final time at the strange, glassless window, now patched with a sheet. "It is an affair most peculiar," he murmured. "A man is dead, but the room refuses to say why," and with that, he summoned the first suspect. Chapter 3. The Gathering of Suspects Drawing Room, normally reserved for brandy and backgammon, had been stripped of its indulgences. The piano was closed, the fire unlit. Heavy velvet drapes hung half-drawn, allowing only a sliver of the gray morning light to bleed through. The scent of beeswax polish lingered, though it could not entirely mask the faint perfume of anxiety. Poirot stood at the hearth, hands clasped neatly before him, while Colonel Montmere and the housekeeper, Mrs. Redfern, finished arranging the chairs. There were 7 in total, one for each guest, set in a loose semicircle, facing Poirot. No one would sit behind another. Everyone would be visible. That, Poirot insisted, was essential. They must see one another, he had said. See and be seen. It is in the small glances, the shared silences, where truth begins to shake loose. At 10:30, the suspects were summoned. Lady Viola Whitcomb entered first, tall and statuesque in a navy silk blouse and high-collared jacket. Her veil was removed today, her face pale but composed. She took the center chair without hesitation, knees crossed, her fingers laced atop a black leather clutch. There was something regal about her presence, but too still, as though she'd rehearsed grief for an audience not yet present. Next came Iris Whitcomb, her stepdaughter. Iris was in her early 30s, narrow-shouldered, with watchful eyes the color of cold slate. She wore a simple gray dress and a thin brooch pinned like a badge of quiet defiance. She sat beside Lady Viola, but leaned slightly away. A subtle declaration of emotional distance. Major Duncan Albright followed, a stiff-legged man in a dark brown tweed coat, his prosthetic hand gloved in soft leather. He nodded curtly to the others and took the seat furthest from the window, removing a pipe he did not light and tapping it absently against his knee. Miss Evelyn Merrow arrived next, late by less than a minute, offering an apology whispered like a prayer. Her black curls were tied back in a silk scarf, and she carried a sketchpad tucked beneath her arm. She chose a chair without speaking, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. Edward Troughton came in, whistling stopped the moment. He caught Poirot's gaze and offered a sheepish smile. He wore a cravat too fashionable for the countryside and shoes that gleamed inappropriately for a man supposedly grieving. He greeted Lady Viola too warmly. Miss Merrow not at all, and took the chair nearest the hearth. Two others completed the circle: Dr. Felix Perenna, a distant cousin of Harold Whitcomb and a specialist in nervous disorders, and Miss Lennox, Lady Viola's longtime companion and estate secretary. Perenna was tall, stooped, and soft-spoken, with rimless spectacles that slid perpetually down his nose. Miss Lennox was a sharp, angular woman with clipped vowels and an efficient, unreadable face. She wore a blouse too plain for a woman of money, yet too fine for a servant. Poirot gave them a moment. He noted how Lady Viola's eyes flicked briefly to Miss Merrow's sketchpad, how Iris watched Edward with something deeper than disapproval, how Miss Lennox sat unnaturally still, as though carved from a stricter world. Then Poirot cleared his throat. It was a soft sound, but it gathered the room like the closing of a lid. "Ms. Amos," he said gently, "you are all here because a man has died under very strange circumstances. I do not believe it was by natural cause, nor by accident." No one spoke. He continued. Mr. Gregory Sharp came to Windward Court with business perhaps unfinished, perhaps unwelcome. Within an hour of entering the study, he was dead. The room was undisturbed. The glass from the shattered window had fled the scene, like a thief ashamed of its task. And yet there is no sign of forced entry, nor sign of anyone having left the premises. He paused, letting that statement settle in the air like dust. "The truth is here," Poirot said. "In this house. Among us." Lady Viola shifted slightly. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, "forgive me, but are we to be treated as criminals?" Poirot smiled politely. "None, madam. But you are all, how shall we say, possible witnesses to one another's silences." Major Albright let out a grunt. "Sounds more like theater than inquiry." Poirot inclined his head. "Ah, but in theater, we wear masks. And here, too, there are masks yet to be removed." Dr. Perenna spoke next, voice gentle. "Are we to be questioned publicly?" "None, doctor. This is but a gathering. I wish only to observe, for now, how you speak to each other, whom you avoid, whom you trust." A silence followed, brittle as old porcelain. Poirot allowed his gaze to drift toward Iris. "Mademoiselle Whitcomb, you were the first to find the body. May I ask what drew you to the study?" Iris answered calmly. Lady Viola had gone to the conservatory. "I noticed the wind had picked up. The study window makes a terrible racket when not shut properly. I went to close it. You did not knock?" "The door was ajar. I assumed no one was inside." Poirot tilted his head. "And what did you see?" Gregory Sharp, face down. "And the window." Her voice faltered for the first time. "It was already broken." Poirot gave a small nod. Merci. He turned now to Miss Marrow. Mademoiselle, you once knew the deceased intimately? A faint flush colored her cheeks. Yes, long ago. Before he and Harold had their falling out. Ah, there was tension between them? Undeniably. Gregory believed Harold had swindled him out of a patent in 1928. A disagreement that became a grudge. Poirot glanced at Lady Viola, who remained impassive. You did not think it odd, madam, he said, to invite a man who once accused your husband of betrayal. Lady Viola spoke coolly. I did not invite him. He invited himself. That caused a ripple through the room. I see, Poirot said softly. Gregory had become a majority shareholder through a trust Harold established for tax purposes. Edward Troughton added, with a casual flick of his wrist. He had more right to be here than some of us. Indeed. Poirot raised an eyebrow, and yet he was not known for his social visits. Why now? Edward shrugged. He said he had business with Lady Viola. Legal transfers. Poirot did not respond. He made a small note in his pocketbook, then closed it with a snap. I thank you all, he said. For now, you are free to go about your routines. I will be speaking with each of you privately, but do not mistake the passage of time for the fading of guilt. It never fades. It only changes form. As the guests began to rise and file out in silence, Poirot remained by the hearth, his eyes steady on the center of the circle. Someone had lied, perhaps not with words but with stillness, with glances, with too much calm or too little, and in that room, beneath the surface civility, Poirot had seen something, not guilt yet. But fear. And fear, he knew, always bloomed before truth. Chapter 4. Poirot Arrivest. Rain had returned with a stubborn persistence by the time Hercule Poirot formally installed himself at Windward Court. Though he had arrived the previous day, this morning marked the true beginning of his investigation, the moment he made the manor his stage, and each inhabitant a player in a drama of motive and concealment. He had refused the east-facing guest suite, which looked out toward the sea, and instead requested a modest corner room overlooking the back gardens. I find the ocean brooding, he explained. It distracts the little gray cells. Too much passion, too many metaphors. The housekeeper, Mrs. Redfern, had tried to offer him something more modern. He declined. Poirot preferred his space spare, ordered, and familiar. Within minutes of entering, he had rearranged the furniture, the side table now to the left of the bed, the armchair positioned diagonally to catch the morning light. He laid out his brushes, his scented oils, and a single polished shoehorn with a reverence one might reserve for relics. Now, with the storm thickening outside and the household divided by silent suspicions, Poirot sat in the study once more. This time, he was alone. He studied the framed photograph of Harold Whitcomb on the mantel, silver-haired, broad-shouldered, with the thin smile of a man who'd built ships and secrets in equal measure. On the desk, Poirot had arranged copies of the shipping company's most recent shareholder reports. A quickscan revealed inconsistencies in dividend distribution. Names shifted subtly, as though a hand were reshaping the narrative of control. But it was the room's atmosphere, its absence of disorder, that haunted Poirot most. A man dies, he murmured aloud, and the room bears no memory of the struggle. No toppled chair, no broken glass inside. It is too perfect, and when things are too perfect, they lie. His gaze drifted again to the window. A square of new glass had been fitted hastily that morning, but the original jagged frame still bore the faint scratches of impact. Poirot had already measured the sill. No footprints, no scuff marks. And yet, somehow, Gregory Sharp had died here, and the only violent thing in the room had fled into the wind. A knock at the door. Poirot turned. It was Miss Lennox, the estate secretary. Monsieur Poirot, she said crisply, Lady Viola requests your presence in the sunroom. She's prepared her notes for you. Should you wish to understand the inner mechanisms of the household." Poirot smiled politely. "Ah, Miss Lennox. So efficient. Please, come in for a moment." She hesitated, then stepped into the study, her shoes clicking once against the wood. Poirot motioned toward the newly replaced window. "You were in the house when the incident occurred?" "Yes, in the West Wing. Updating ledgers. You did not hear the glass break?" "No, not until Miss Iris raised the alarm." "This house absorbs sound strangely. Old walls, deep halls." Poirot gave a slight nod. "You are Lady Viola's secretary." "But also more than that, yes. I've been with her for 15 years, she replied without inflection. "I manage her correspondence, the estate finances, and when necessary the family's public posture. A delicate role. Someone has to play it." Poirot studied her with quiet interest. "You were present when Mr. Sharp arrived?" "I was. He brought documents, legal in nature, but would not say more." Did Lady Viola seem surprised? Miss Lennox hesitated. "Just briefly. No, but nor was she pleased." Poirot made a soft sound, half exhalation, half thought. "Merci, Mademoiselle Lennox. That will be all for now. Tell Lady Viola I shall be with her shortly." After she left, Poirot resumed his seat and turned his attention to a handwritten note, tucked among the financial papers. It had been unsigned, its contents cryptic. "We cannot undo what was done in 1928, but we can prevent it from destroying us now. Say nothing until I return." He tapped the note once. 1928 again. Poirot recalled Evelyn Merrow's mention of that year, something about a patent, a dispute. It was beginning to recur, like a low drumbeat under the surface of every conversation. Shortly thereafter, Poirot made his way to the sunroom. Lady Viola awaited him with a neat folder in her lap and a cup of tea steaming gently on the table. Beside her, the sunroom, with its mosaic tile floor and walls of glass, was the warmest place in the house even in the rain. Ferns and ivy crept toward the light, their green defiance a strange contrast to the somber mood settling over the estate. "Monsieur Poirot," she said smoothly, "you've come to peel back the wallpaper, I imagine." "I come only to ask questions, madam." "Wallpaper peels itself when the moisture beneath becomes unbearable." She chuckled once. "How poetic." Poirot took a seat. "Tell me, Lady Viola, what precisely did Gregory Sharp want from you?" She opened the folder with delicate fingers and drew out a single page. "He wished for me to cede my shares in the Whitcomb Company. The contract is unsigned. I told him I needed time. That was 3 days ago, and yet he remained. Yes, said he enjoyed the sea air." Poirot gave her a long look. "And you believed that?" She sipped her tea. "I stopped believing in innocent motives years ago. But it's not illegal to be persistent." "None," Poirot agreed. "But persistence, when mixed with desperation, often turns dangerous." Lady Viola's lips tightened. "He had leverage. I don't know what, but he hinted at something. Papers Harold had hidden, records of a transaction that might be seen as irregular. A blackmail? Not overtly, but the implication was there." Poirot nodded slowly. "And the others in the house, did any of them know of this conversation?" "No, I kept it to myself. Iris would only lecture me. Evelyn would dissolve. Edward would see an opportunity." Poirot smiled faintly. "And yet, madam, your silence did not keep you safe, for the first time." Lady Viola's composure faltered. "You think it was meant for me?" Poirot did not answer directly. Instead, he said, "When the glass breaks in a room and does not remain, it is not merely destruction. It is a message. Something was meant to vanish." He rose, bowing gently. "I thank you, madam. I believe our next conversation shall be even more revealing." As he left, he caught a glimpse of Iris standing at the end of the corridor, half-shadowed, half still. Watching. Poirot adjusted his cuffs. The house was beginning to hum with unspoken tensions. The secrets were no longer content to stay buried. Something had stirred them loose, and in the stormlight of Windward Court, the truth like the sea was rising. Chapter 5. The interviews begin. Next morning broke as a dull smudge of pale light behind thick rain clouds, and Poirot declared that it was time, that is, to begin the careful dissection of words, expressions, and silences. Each person, he told Colonel Montmere, will reveal something, even if they intend to conceal everything. The interviews would be held in the small morning room overlooking the south garden, a quiet, neutral space with just enough warmth to disarm, but not enough comfort to lull. A single armchair was placed beside a small tea table, angled slightly so the guest sat half facing the window and half facing Poirot. The detective himself sat opposite in a high-backed chair, always upright, always composed, his silver-topped cane resting against his knee. The first to be summoned was Edward Troughton. He arrived with his usual air of disheveled charm, the collar of his shirt slightly open, his cuffs stylishly frayed. He smiled as he entered, but it lacked conviction. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," he said breezily. "Interrogation, is it? Or just tea and philosophy?" Poirot gestured politely to the chair. "Let us say, a conversation, monsieur. Please sit." Troughton did, folding one ankle over his knee and leaning back. "You knew Gregory Sharp well?" Poirot asked. "Well enough. He was Harold's thorn and later Viola's ghost. Sharp, as his name suggests, not someone you'd choose to share a port with. Yet he came to Windward Court as a guest." Edward chuckled. "Guests arrive by invitation. Sharp showed up with contracts, not exactly bearing flowers." Poirot leaned forward. "And what was your interest in his arrival?" "I had none. Edward's smile thinned. "We crossed paths in the hallway once. He muttered something about what was owed. I said I hoped he found it. That's the extent of our exchange." Poirot tapped his cane. "You are a beneficiary of the estate?" "In a modest sense. Harold considered me promising. He saw potential in me, perhaps more than I deserved." "Ah," Poirot said gently. "And did Gregory Sharp share that opinion?" A beat of silence. "I doubt it," Edward said, suddenly solemn. "Gregory always believed there were debts unacknowledged. Harold owed him. Viola owed him. Even Evelyn, perhaps in a different way. Sharp wasn't good at letting go." Poirot nodded. "Merci, Monsieur Troughton. That will be all for now." Edward rose, gave a slight bow, and left. The charm stayed behind, like a faint perfume dot. Next came Evelyn Marrow. She moved softly, as if not to disturb the floor beneath her, and held her sketchbook like a shield. "Miss Marrow," Poirot said kindly, "thank you for coming." She offered a faint smile and took her seat. Her coat was damp, as though she had walked in the garden before being called. "You were once engaged to Harold Whitcomb," Poirot began. "Yes, many years ago. Before Viola, before the money. Yet you remained close with the family?" "I kept in touch with Iris, with Harold, occasionally. Viola tolerated me, but I was not part of their world anymore." "And Gregory Sharp? What was your connection?" She hesitated, fingers tightening on the edge of the sketchbook. "We were companions in loss," she said finally. "Gregory lost Harold's trust. I lost Harold's love. There's a symmetry to that." Poirot studied her gently. "Did you resent Lady Viola?" "I pitied her. Still do, because she won Harold's name, but not his loyalty." Poirot let that hang for a moment. "Miss Marrow, where were you when the body was found?" "In my room, sketching. I didn't hear the scream. Iris came to tell me." Poirot nodded. "And did Gregory ever mention the events of 1928 to you?" "Once, a single evening at a cafe in London, years ago. He said Harold had used him, that he'd patented something under Gregory's name, but registered it with his own firm. I didn't press him. Why not? I didn't need more bitterness. Poirot smiled gently. You are very perceptive, mademoiselle, but you see only in charcoal. You do not wish to see in red. She stood. Because red is irreversible. Poirot bowed. Merci. She left, a ghost made of paper and regret. Major Albright was next. He entered with his usual stiff gait and a faint smell of pipe tobacco. Major, Poirot said, let us be brief. I prefer it that way. Your history with the Whitcombs? Old regiment friends. Harold and I served together. Viola was. Always a bit much, but Harold admired her. You knew Gregory Sharp. Barely. Didn't trust him. Didn't like how he looked at the younger staff. Interesting. Poirot murmured. Were you in the house when the incident occurred? I was shaving. I keep a routine, Poirot. Discipline, even in retirement. That's how one keeps a clear mind. Poirot raised an eyebrow. And yet, even the sharpest minds can be misled by their own rigidity, non? The Major's jaw tensed. I didn't kill the man, if that's what you're implying. Poirot didn't flinch. I imply nothing. I only listen. The Major gave a stiff nod and left. Dr. Prenna followed. He was mild, apologetic, and smelled faintly of cloves. I'm not sure what help I can be. Monsieur Poirot, he said, adjusting his glasses. You are a man who studies the mind, yes? Then help me understand this. What kind of person dies in a room that refuses to show it? Prenna blinked. Someone very careful, or someone very afraid. Poirot smiled. Just so. He asked about 1928. Prenna knew little. He asked about Gregory Sharp. Prenna had no strong opinion. But you sense things, do you not, Doctor? Poirot asked. I do, Prenna admitted. And there is something profoundly unresolved in this house. Something old. Poirot nodded once. Merci. Last came Iris. She walked in with her arms crossed, chin lifted slightly. You don't trust me, she said, before he could speak. I trust only what can be tested. Mademoiselle, please sit. She sat, but warily. Why were you the first to find the body? I heard the wind, that awful howling from the east wing. I went to close the window and found the body. Yes, you and your stepmother, how close are you? She gave a short laugh. As close as porcelain and fire. Poirot tilted his head. Meaning, she burns, I break, and Gregory Sharp. She frowned. He was like a hawk, always circling, watching. I don't mourn him. Poirot gave a small nod. But you are frightened. Of what? Not of who killed him, she said, but of what he brought with him. What did he bring? She looked down. A key, not to a lock. To something worse. Poirot stood slowly. Then let us find the door, mademoiselle. As she left, Poirot remained still, listening not to what had been said but to the spaces between each word. There, the echoes of motive waited. And soon, they would speak. Chapter 6, the first false Ledby midday. A hush had fallen over Windward Court, not the quiet of rest, but the weighted stillness of a house holding its breath. Poirot sat alone in the library now, surrounded by rows of inherited knowledge and dusted vanity, a place where secrets might sit untouched for decades beneath gilded spines. His interviews had revealed fragmented slivers of contradiction and suppressed resentment, but they had not yet coalesced into a picture he could hang his theory upon. Still, something in the atmosphere had shifted. A tension, once elusive, had begun to draw tighter. Colonel Montmere entered, his expression more animated than usual. We may have something, he announced, handing Poirot a sealed envelope. The constable discovered this behind the shrubbery, just below the broken study window, hidden beneath a layer of dead leaves. It's a handkerchief silk, monogrammed. Initials, E.T. Poirot took it with gloved fingers, unwrapping it delicately. The cloth was expensive, slightly torn at the edge, with a faint smudge of something dark near the center. Ink, perhaps, or blood. He held it to his nose. Neither. The scent was floral, artificial. A cologne. Monsieur Troughton, he murmured. The man of fashionable charm and mismatched sincerity. Montmere nodded. We showed it to him. He claimed it had gone missing 2 days ago. Says it must have fallen from his coat pocket during a walk. And yet, Poirot said softly, it is found beneath a window shattered only yesterday. Curious timing, non? Montmere crossed his arms. It places him at the scene. Perhaps not at the moment of death, but close enough. There are no other items recovered. No stone, no object used to break the glass. But if he was there watching, listening. Poirot tapped his fingers against the envelope. Or staging. That afternoon, Poirot requested another conversation with Edward Troughton. This time, in the conservatory. The setting had changed. The tone would follow suit. Troughton writhed without protest, though the edges of his confidence had dulled. He sat across from Poirot, his smile a little tighter, his fingers drumming a faint, irregular rhythm on the arm of the chair. Monsieur Troughton. Poirot began gently. I would ask that you speak plainly now. The time for flourishes has passed. A handkerchief bearing your initials was found beneath the broken window. How do you explain this? Edward blinked slowly, lips parting in deliberate surprise. I already told the Colonel I lost it. The day before Gregory arrived, I believe. I often walk along the hedgerows. Perhaps the wind carried it. The wind, Poirot echoed. Which direction does it blow most days here at Windward Court? Edward hesitated. East to west, usually. Poirot tilted his head. Indeed. Yet the handkerchief was found east of the house, beneath a shrub that would have shielded it from a westerly wind. It was tucked, monsieur, not blown. Edward's smile cracked. Are you accusing me of murder over a piece of cloth? I accuse no one, Poirot said calmly. I observe. I test the truth. And truth, monsieur, is a poor actor. It cannot pretend for long. Edward leaned forward, suddenly defensive. I had no quarrel with Sharp. I barely spoke to him. Yet you knew he was threatening Lady Viola's control of the company. That's her concern, not mine. But if she fell, Poirot said softly, you would no longer be her heir apparent. The promise of wealth, monsieur, how quickly it clouds a man's vision. Edward stood abruptly, face flushed. If you think I killed him, then charge me. Otherwise, stop parading suspicion like a carnival. Poirot did not rise. You misunderstand me, monsieur. I do not suspect. I eliminate. One by one, each falsehood is peeled away until the only truth remains, shivering and exposed. Edward said nothing. He turned and left with quick, angry strides. The click of his heels swallowed by the thick carpeted hallway. Later that evening, a decision was made. Colonel Montmere, pressed by the optics of inaction, announced that Edward Troughton was to remain confined to his quarters, not under arrest, but not free to come and go. It was a gesture meant to signal progress. The household received the news with a mixed palette of reactions. Evelyn seemed quietly dismayed. Iris, unreadable. Lady Viola offered no expression at all. Poirot, however, did not celebrate. He returned to his room and sat by the window as the rain fell in sheets, tracing long silver fingers down the glass. He poured himself a single measure of sherry and watched the horizon fade. It was too neat. Too early. The handkerchief planted, perhaps, or placed in haste, a distraction disguised as a blunder. Gregory Sharp had died without struggle. No cry, no disarray. And yet someone wanted Poirot to believe in haste, in clumsiness. That was not how murder worked, not this one. He stared into his glass, thinking. The shape of the lie was growing clearer, but the voice behind it still remained silent. Downstairs, the servants whispered that Poirot had already solved the case, that the Belgian detective was merely savoring the performance now. But Poirot knew better. The play had only just begun. The curtain on truth had yet to rise. And somewhere in the house, someone calm, calculating was listening. Chapter 7. The psychological gamut following morning arrived with a deceptive stillness. The storm had passed, leaving the grounds drenched and glittering under a pale, brittle sun. But the silence it left behind was not one of peace, it was the quiet of something waiting to happen. Windward Court seemed to know this. The halls felt narrower. The glances between guests sharpened like the chill in the air. Poirot, ever precise, dressed with extra care that day. A dark gray suit, a pocket square of deep plum, and a fresh gardenia in his lapel. He took his coffee in the west parlor, alone, watching the reflection of the morning light ripple on the floor tiles like a clock without hands. It was time. He decided not to gather evidence, but to test character. The false lead had been too convenient. The handkerchief, the positioning, the outburst from Edward, none of it sang with truth. It was a stage dissonance. A good performance, perhaps, but Poirot did not attend theater for the actors. He watched for the director, and today he intended to provoke the one pulling strings. His first visit was to Evelyn Merrow. She was in the garden, seated beneath the shade of a dying elm, sketching with quick, nervous strokes. Her lines were darker today, less fluid. A shadow clung to them. Poirot approached slowly, hands behind his back, eyes drawn not to the artist but the subject of her work. She had sketched the east wing of Windward Court twice, once intact, once with the window shattered like a jagged scream across the paper. 'Tis dramatique. Poirot murmured, and Evelyn looked up, startled. "It's the only thing I can draw lately," she said quietly. "I've tried flowers, faces. They all turn into that window." He sat beside her without invitation. "Mademoiselle, I must ask, do you believe Edward Troughton killed Gregory Sharp?" She stared at him, startled by the bluntness. No, I don't." Pourquoi pas? "Because Edward is clever, but not careful. That scene in the garden, his rage, the drama it was to raw, too unshaped." Poirot smiled faintly. "Just as I thought." He leaned forward slightly. "You see, Miss Merrow, murder is not always committed by the most volatile person. Often, it is the one who best understands silence." Evelyn's gaze dropped to her sketchbook. "Then I fear you have your work cut out for you." Poirot stood. "Indeed, mademoiselle, but already I hear the fabric fraying." He left her with the breeze rustling the leaves and the scratch of charcoal against paper behind. Next, he visited Major Albright. The retired soldier was polishing his boots in the study, using a cloth with almost military fervor. He looked up, unsurprised. "You've come to poke holes in my story now, Poirot." "Non, mon capitaine," Poirot replied, folding his arms. "I come to ask a single question." The major grunted. "Go on." Poirot took a slow step forward. "Did you ever serve with Harold Whitcomb in 1928? Albright's hand paused. "Briefly, and with Gregory Sharp?" "No, I knew of him." "That's all." Poirot nodded, watching the hesitation. "Gregory believed Harold stole something. Not only from him but perhaps from others. A patent, yes, but a secret, too." Albright said nothing. Poirot tilted his head. "You fought wars, Major. You know what silence is worth. When to keep it, when to sell it." The Major's face darkened, but he did not respond. Poirot offered a slight bow. "Thank you for the conversation." He left without waiting for permission. That afternoon, he invited Iris Whitcomb to join him in the music room. She entered warily, lips tight, arms crossed. She did not sit. Poirot remained seated by the grand piano, lightly running a finger along the lacquered edge. "You are frightened, mademoiselle," he said gently. "I see it in the way you carry your shoulders, the way you watch doors more than people." Iris's voice was dry. "You should be watching the windows." Poirot smiled faintly. "Oh, but I am. Especially the ones that break without letting glass fall inward. Especially the ones that were already cracked. Long before they shattered." Her expression faltered. Poirot leaned forward. What did you see that day? I told you nothing, no, mademoiselle. You told me what you thought I should believe, but your silence speaks. It says, I know something, but it is not mine to tell. Iris's jaw clenched. You wouldn't understand. Try me. She looked down. Gregory came here with something, a letter. He showed it to Viola. I overheard. It said something about an agreement one she signed years ago. Before Harold's death, she told him to burn it. He refused. Do you know what it contained? She shook her head. No, but she was afraid. Truly afraid. Not like Viola. Poirot was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood. Merci, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful. As she turned to leave, Poirot added softly, and if you ever do find that letter, be careful who you trust with it. By evening, Poirot had begun to see the shape of the labyrinth. Each suspect had offered a piece, unaware they were fitting a mosaic. Sharp had come with leverage perhaps not legal, but powerful. Something Viola feared, something Iris heard, something Albright remembered. Evelyn mourned him, but not just for who he was, perhaps for who he almost became, and Edward. Edward had simply stepped into a role that had been too readily prepared for him. At dinner, the mood was brittle, conversations were short, silverware scraped loudly, and through it all, Poirot sat calmly, smiling occasionally, his eyes moving from face to face, as if following music only he could hear. He knew now what he had to do. The game had begun, and the mind he was hunting had already flinched. It was time to press harder. Chapter 8. A secondary mystery next day dawned under a reluctant sun, pale and wavering behind a thin veil of mist. Windward Court seemed subdued, quieter than usual, as though the walls themselves were weary of the silence they'd been made to hold. Breakfast was a muted affair. Lady Viola did not appear. Miss Merrill lingered over toast without eating, and Edward Troughton, still confined to his quarters, was represented only by a covered tray taken upstairs by the butler. The others offered occasional half-hearted remarks about the weather or politics, but the conversations were like splinters, thin, sharp, and quickly abandoned. Poirot, as always, was composed. He said little but watched much. When Lady Viola finally emerged mid-morning, she wore a deep burgundy dress and a veil once again. This time not out of mourning but concealment. Her face looked drawn, eyes restless, hands gloved though it wasn't cold. She walked with brisk determination, as if motion could disguise whatever storm now stirred within her. Poirot watched her pass down the corridor, noting the subtle twitch of her left hand as it brushed the edge of a framed photograph. The picture tilted slightly in its place. She didn't stop to fix it. At precisely noon, the housekeeper, Mrs. Redfern, knocked on Poirot's door. Her face was pale, lips pressed so tightly they looked like a seam stitched shut. In her hands was a sealed silver tray containing a folded envelope and a small, capped glass vial. She said only, "It was found in Lady Viola's writing desk, monsieur, hidden in the back drawer beneath old correspondence. No one knows who discovered it. It was just there." Poirot took the items carefully and dismissed her with a gentle thank you. Once alone, he examined the envelope. It was addressed in a sharp, unfamiliar hand. No name, no date, only the words, "In the event of a failure of nerve," inside. A single sheet of cream paper, typed, not signed. "You may think this a bluff. It is not. If my demands are not met, the vial contains enough to erase the memory of the arrangement completely from every ledger, from every tongue. You know what's at stake." Poirot's brow furrowed. The wording was cold and calculated, a threat veiled in the language of certainty. He turned his attention to the vial. The liquid inside was pale, viscous, slightly yellowed, with a bitter scent that suggested bitterness even before it met the tongue. Not perfume, not medicine. Poison, perhaps, but of a more theatrical sort. He wasted no time. Lady Viola was summoned to the library, where Poirot awaited her behind the wide walnut desk, the envelope and vial placed in front of him like evidence laid for judgment. She entered with poise, though it cracked slightly when her eyes landed on the objects. She remained standing. "This was discovered in your writing desk, madam," Poirot said, "and I do not think it has been there long. Who placed it there, I do not know yet. But it is meant for you. That much is certain." Lady Viola's voice was low. "And what do you think it means?" "I think," Poirot replied, "that someone is growing desperate, or very confident. It is a secondary crime, a message sent beneath the veil of mystery." She reached for the envelope, but Poirot stopped her gently. "Non, madam, please. Tell me instead, what arrangement did Gregory Sharp speak of?" Her eyes flashed. "I told you he had papers, threats, suggestions of impropriety in Harold's dealings. This note," Poirot said softly, "suggests more than impropriety. It suggests conspiracy, collusion, and now—" Silence by force. She sat down slowly, her legs folding beneath her like a marionette eased into rest. "I don't know what to say, monsieur. If this is poison, it is theatrical, ridiculous." Poirot nodded. "But people are often at their most dangerous when they begin performing." She took a breath. "The year before Harold died, he made arrangements, diverted money through false trusts, moved shares in secret. I didn't understand it all, but Gregory did. He wanted me to validate a transfer that would have secured him a controlling share. I refused. I still refuse." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "But did you sign anything?" "No, not knowingly. And yet Gregory claimed you had." She nodded. "He said I'd initialed a letter at a party thinking it was a guest list. I laughed it off. But now, I wonder." Poirot tapped a finger against the envelope. "This was not meant to kill. It was meant to threaten. Someone fears exposure, and they know you are the axis around which the past spins." He stood. "We must locate the original document, the supposed letter of agreement. If it exists, it holds the key to Sharp's leverage and perhaps to his death." That evening, Poirot summoned Miss Lennox to the library. The secretary entered with her usual crisp grace, but her eyes, today, flickered with something Poirot had not seen in her before: apprehension. "I trust you keep copies of all legal correspondence, mademoiselle?" he asked. "Of course. Everything from the estate is documented, even drafts." "Yes, I keep them in the cabinet upstairs." Poirot nodded. "Then you will forgive me if I ask to see every letter, memorandum, or agreement bearing Lady Viola's initials, especially from the year 1928 to the present." Miss Lennox hesitated. "Just a second." Then she said, "Of course," and turned sharply to go. Poirot watched her leave, thoughtful. There was something else hiding here, something layered beneath the murder. The note and the vial had opened a second door. Someone had wanted the past buried, but it refused to stay in its grave. Gregory Sharp had not only been killed, he had been silenced, not because of who he was, but what he remembered, or worse, what he could prove. Later that night, Poirot sat at his window once more, the moon casting long fingers over the drenched garden. He could hear the faint creak of footsteps in the hallway, soft and slow, as though someone moved with deliberate stealth. He did not rise, not yet. Soon, the ghosts of Windward Court would speak, but first, they would tremble. Chapter 9. Hidden Connections. Morning returned with the slow, golden reluctance of early spring. Fog clung to the hedgerows like secret thoughts unspoken, and Windward Court seemed more brittle with each passing hour, as though the very bones of the house had begun to shift under the weight of too many lies. Poirot rose early, his routine as impeccable as ever, brushing each sleeve, polishing the rim of his mustache, and adjusting his lapel pin with the reverence of a priest preparing for Mass. Today, he would pull harder at the threads. Enough veils had fallen. It was time to trace the knots between them. Miss Lennox delivered the requested documents without protest, but with an unnaturally clipped efficiency. 2 folders, one thick with ledgers and correspondence, the other slim, with only a handful of papers inside. She placed them on Poirot's desk without meeting his eyes. These are the only signed agreements bearing Lady Viola's initials from the past 5 years. I've cross-checked them against the registry. Poirot thanked her and waited until the door clicked shut before opening the thinner folder first. Inside were 3 letters to routine acknowledgments of foundation donations, and one brief note dated October 1928, addressed to Harold Whitcomb. The 3rd letter was the most curious. It read like a casual note, a brief line authorizing proceedings as previously discussed, followed by a single initial V. There was no letterhead, no witness, no legal framing, but it was typed on the same machine as the threatening note found in Lady Viola's desk. Poirot leaned back, fingers steepled beneath his chin. This letter, if it was what Gregory had referenced, could indeed be interpreted as tacit approval of questionable business actions, but it was vague, strategically so, and it was unsigned in any legal sense. Yet someone believed it held power. He turned now to the heavier folder. Most of the content was mundane, but a name caught his eye again and again in the early documents: Evelyn Merrow. Years ago, she had been listed as a silent partner in a now-defunct charity run through the Whitcomb estate. That name had not appeared in any conversation until now. Poirot frowned. If Evelyn had been financially tied to Harold's affairs after their broken engagement, it would mean she was far more entangled than she claimed, and Gregory Sharp had known it. There was motive in that knowledge, not only for him to act, but for others to stop him. Poirot found Miss Merrow in the art room, alone. She stood before a blank canvas, brush in hand, as though trying to conjure a vision from the emptiness. She looked tired, softer somehow, her defenses worn down by the storm of insinuations and grief. "May I disturb you for a moment, mademoiselle?" Poirot asked gently. She didn't turn. "You already have." Poirot stepped further inside. "I was reviewing the foundation records. You were once listed as a partner." Now she turned. "That was Harold's doing. He added my name to a charitable trust without asking. Said it would look better. That people trusted my face more than his. And you remained involved?" "Not really. It dissolved within a year. I never saw a pound of it. It was just another one of Harold's illusions." "Were you aware Gregory Sharp found this detail before his death?" Her shoulders stiffened. "No, but it doesn't surprise me. He always had a talent for digging up bones. Do you think he intended to use it against you?" She shook her head. "Not directly. I think he used everything, all at once, to see who flinched first." Poirot studied her. "You were more than a ghost from Harold's past, mademoiselle. You were a mirror, and perhaps someone feared what you might reflect." Before she could reply, a knock echoed faintly from the corridor. A servant delivered word that Lady Viola was unwell and had taken to her room. Poirot acknowledged this with a slight nod and dismissed the messenger. The pattern, he thought, was ripening. As the investigation pressed forward, certain players began to retreat, and that, too, was revealing. He spent the early afternoon walking the perimeter of the house, then down along the sloping path that curved toward the coastal cliffs. The air was sharp and smelled of salt and pine. Windward Court loomed behind him like a half-sunken ship in a garden of stone. Beneath its elegance, Poirot felt the pulse of something old and buried, not simply a murder, a history, a deception sewn over years, like stitches pulling a wound closed. Too tightly, too quickly, returning, he made his way to the study once more. And it was there he found Colonel Montmere, frowning over a map spread across the desk. "I've been reviewing the grounds," the colonel said, "trying to find any unusual entry point. But the east wing where the broken window is backs directly onto the cliffs. No footprints, no sign of recent disturbance, and no handholds beneath that ledge." Poirot leaned forward, his eyes glinting. "Which tells us, mon ami, that the crime was not meant to confuse with its complexity but with its simplicity. It tries too hard to say nothing happened. Montmere raised a brow. And yet, something certainly did. Exactly. Which means, someone is hiding the thing we are not looking for. Poirot moved to the desk. I need to see the guest ledger. The full one. Montmere retrieved it. Poirot flipped through, scanning names, rival dates, handwriting. Halfway through the second page, his finger stopped. Here, he murmured. This entry was added later. The ink is different. It was a small thing in addendum beside Evelyn Merrow's name. A +1. No signature, no clarification. Unregistered guest, it read. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Someone had been here under no official name. Someone still might be. Poirot closed the book and looked toward the corridor, his thoughts racing. Gregory Sharp had come armed with documents. Yes, but also, perhaps, with someone else. An accomplice or a threat. And if that person still lingered in the shadows of Windward Court, then the true danger had not yet passed. He would need to act quickly now. For the house was not just haunted by the past, it was being manipulated in the present. Chapter 10. Poirot's Secret Clues. Moon that night rose late, veiled by streaks of thin cloud like gauze drawn over an aging face. Windward Court lay in a hush deeper than silence, as if the walls themselves had decided to withhold breath. Poirot sat in his room, the lamps dimmed, his silhouette framed against the pale glow of a single candle. Before him on the desk lay three objects: the guest ledger, the unsigned threatening note, and the slim envelope containing the cryptic 1928 letter. To most, they were disconnected fragments, but to Poirot, they were three corners of a box, and somewhere inside that box was the truth no one wanted opened. The clue had come not in the evidence, but in its absence, not in what the documents said but what they refused to name. He had reviewed the guestbook entry 3 times. The addendum beside Evelyn Merrow's name, +1, unregistered guest, was written in a thin, nervous hand, likely inserted at the last moment. But it was not Evelyn's handwriting, nor Viola's, nor Lennox's. Poirot had seen their letters, their loops and strokes. The script was smaller, slanted, with an unusual curve to the capital U. He had seen it once before on a folded corner of a sketch Evelyn had dropped. During their first interview, she had retrieved it hastily, almost as if it were not meant to be seen. That night, long after the house had gone still, Poirot left his room and moved quietly down the gallery corridor, his steps light as breath on marble. He had no lantern. The moonlight was enough. At Evelyn Merrow's door, he paused not to listen, but to remember. The timing of her arrival, the first scream, her precise calm. She had said she was alone. She had said many things. He did not knock. He did not enter. He simply looked down at the bottom of her door, where a faint line of soft graphite had smudged against the rug of fine powder, invisible in daylight but stark under the right angle. Sketching dust. From one person, perhaps, but then why the smudge on the outside? The next morning, Poirot summoned Iris Whitcomb under the pretense of revisiting her recollections of the day of the murder. They met in the solarium, where the air was warm and filled with the sweet, cloying scent of overgrown orchids. Iris arrived looking sharper than she had the past few days. Her posture was straighter, her eyes watchful, defiant. She sat before Poirot, crossing one leg over the other, arms folded, but her gaze open, willing. "Iris," he began gently, "you once said that Sharp brought a key, not a literal one, a metaphor. You said it unlocked something worse." She didn't blink. "Yes, and I still believe it." Poirot inclined his head. "What if I told you he brought more than paper? That someone came with him, someone he didn't sign in?" Now she blinked, just once, but Poirot saw the ripple. "I don't know what you're talking about, but someone does," Poirot said quietly. "Someone who never entered by the front door. Someone who has not been seen but has been heard. I found traces outside Miss Marrow's room, and someone has added an entry to the guest book in fear. Iris exhaled slowly. There was a visitor, she admitted. I didn't see their face, but I saw Sharp speaking to someone out by the stables late at night. A woman, I think. She wore a scarf, kept her back turned. When I asked about it, he said it was none of my concern. Poirot leaned forward. Do you think Evelyn knew? I think Evelyn was afraid of her, or what she represented. Poirot nodded, satisfied. You've been more honest than most, mademoiselle. Thank you. After Iris left, Poirot returned to the study, where the fire had burned low. Miss Lennox was already waiting, her hands folded tightly in her lap. He had not summoned her, she had come of her own volition. That, in itself, was telling. You found something, haven't you? She said quietly. The air feels different today. Poirot smiled. Ah, you are sensitive to atmosphere. That is rare in one so. Orderly, she gave a small, sharp laugh. Order is a shield, Monsieur Poirot. It keeps chaos at bay, but it doesn't erase it. Poirot offered her the guest book. Do you recognize this edition? She studied it. Not my handwriting, I know. But it was written by someone inside this house. Someone afraid of being tied to what came next. She looked up. There was another guest, wasn't there? Yes, Poirot said softly. An uninvited one. One who arrived in secret, stayed in silence, and vanished after Sharp was found dead. But she left traces. She left fear. And now she leaves motive. Miss Lennox didn't respond. But in her eyes, Poirot saw at recognition, then denial, then the faintest shimmer of worry. She was not guilty, he was now certain. But she knew something she hadn't dared speak aloud. And she would not be the last. That evening, Poirot returned to his room and laid out all the pieces once more. The threat, the letter, the missing witness, the half-truths layered over decades. And then, he added one final piece, a scrap of fine paper he had found in the fireplace of the music room. Earlier that day, barely burned, its contents partly legible. She knows too much. Evelyn can't hold it back forever, no signature. But the handwriting was unmistakable now. Iris Whitcomb's. He placed the paper at the center of his notes and looked at the case as it now stood. Not just the murder of Gregory Sharp, but a deeper, older game. Played across time and inheritance, love and ruin. One murder had already happened, but the stage was not yet cleared. There was another act coming, and Poirot intended to meet it standing. Chapter 11. Tension's risive atmosphere at Windward Court had thickened like the sky. Before a thunderstorm silent yet pulsing, its pressure pressing into the walls and weighing on every breath. No one lingered anymore in the corridors. No one stayed too long in a room where they might be overheard. Meals became mechanical, bites taken without appetite, glances exchanged like threats. The household had become a theater of restraint, each character holding back just enough to seem civilized while quietly calculating. Who might be watching? Poirot had seen this before, not just in houses haunted by murder, but in those already fractured by old grievances that only required a single spark to ignite them. That spark, it seemed, was close. Poirot remained his composed self, moving through the estate like a quiet tide, gathering the last of the missing threads. He said little now, asked even less, but his presence was enough to unsettle. People had begun to avoid him. Even Lady Viola, once poised in widowly control, now took her tea alone, behind a closed door. Miss Marrow no longer sketched in the garden. Iris walked with her arms folded tightly, eyes darting toward every shadow. And Miss Lennox had grown visibly thinner in the past 2 days. As though carrying the weight of another's secret on her back. It was after supper, with the house retired into its private corners, that the real tremor began. Poirot was in the drawing room, standing before the fireplace when Colonel Montmere arrived with a folded note in hand. Found this slipped beneath the door of the servants' quarters. he said grimly. Unsigned. Poirot took it delicately, unfolded the page, and read, "She'll talk soon. The sketchbook has everything. If she shows anyone, it's over. No name. No handwriting they could immediately identify." But the message was enough. The sketchbook. Poirot repeated. "Evelyn Merrowes." Montmere looked uneasy. "Do you think she's in danger?" "I think she already was," Poirot replied. "But now, so is the person who wrote this." He wasted no time. Within minutes, Evelyn was summoned to the library, where Poirot received her with a calm smile. She entered looking pale but alert, clutching the leather-bound sketchbook like a shield. "I heard something was found," she said, voice hushed. "Has someone threatened me?" Poirot nodded. "They have not named you, but the warning is clear." She placed the sketchbook gently on the desk and opened it. Inside were not only drawings of Windward Court, but something more unsettling rough. Surrealist sketches of people, contorted into unnatural shapes. One figure resembled a man whose face was blank, crumbling, as if memory had erased his features. Another was a woman with gloved hands but no eyes. And there, buried near the center, was a sketch of Gregory Sharp, seated at the edge of the study window, a second shadow behind him. "You saw someone," Poirot said softly. "The night before he died." Evelyn nodded. "I wasn't sure if it was real. But yes, there was someone with him. A woman. I drew her later, but I couldn't remember her face. Was it Iris?" "No. Taller, older, I think. I couldn't hear them clearly, but she gave him something." "An envelope." Poirot leaned closer. "This sketchbook, it's more than memory. It's confession. You feared speaking, but you drew the truth." Evelyn gave a weak smile. "It was the only way I could say it without saying it." As she spoke, the door burst open. Iris stood there, wild-eyed, fists clenched. "You had no right," she snapped, her voice brittle with fury. "That book, it's yours, not ours. You're turning this into theater." Poirot raised a hand calmly. "Mademoiselle Iris, please. No one is accusing. She's painting shadows into facts." Iris spat. "That sketch could be anyone. She hated Gregory. We all know it." Evelyn's voice trembled but remained firm. "I didn't hate him. I pitied him." Iris laughed sharply. "Then why did he come to you last? Why did he leave your name out of every paper he brought?" Poirot stepped between them, quiet but firm. "Enough. The truth is beginning to surface, yes. But it must do so without destruction. This is not the time for panic." Iris's eyes flicked toward the sketchbook, then to Poirot. And in that glance, Poirot saw at the flicker of recognition, not of the drawings, but of the woman in the shadow. Who was she? Poirot asked, softly now, the unregistered guest, but Iris only turned and walked away, her footsteps vanishing into the corridor like an echo lost in the fog. Poirot closed the sketchbook gently. The page was beginning to turn, and with it, the house would crack. Secrets long buried were no longer content to remain so. The past was knocking, and someone, very soon, would answer. Chapter 12. The Confrontation Word Court, once a monument to silence and wealth, had become restless. Doors closed more sharply. Voices dropped lower. Even the wind seemed to lean closer against the glass, as though listening. Poirot sensed the change not in what was said, but in what was avoided. Tension lived now in every hallway, every glance. The storm had shifted inward. Evelyn's sketchbook had spoken more clearly than words could. And now everyone, particularly Iris, was trying not to tremble under its weight. Poirot sat that evening in the music room, where dusk filtered through stained glass windows and colored the walls with pale fragments of light. He had asked for Miss Iris Whitcomb to meet him alone, not as an interrogation, he'd told her, but as a conversation, a shared silence between two people who had grown weary of pretenses. When she arrived, she was dressed in black trousers and a linen blouse, her hair tied back sharply, her lips pressed in a line of forced calm. She did not sit. "You've already decided what you think of me," she said before he could speak. "So why call me here?" Poirot smiled gently, motioning to the chair opposite. "Because, mademoiselle, I have not decided. I only observe. It is for you to choose whether to tell me what you've withheld, or wait until the house does it for you." Iris hesitated, then crossed the room slowly, lowering herself into the chair like someone about to confess something without knowing how. The piano between them remained closed, silent, the air around it holding the weight of something unsung. "You saw the sketch," Poirot began. "You recognized something, not in the drawing itself, but in what it suggested." She looked away, toward the tall windows. "I recognized the scarf. That's all." "You recognized the woman," Poirot corrected gently. "And you knew why Gregory was meeting her in secret. You knew before he died." Iris exhaled slowly. "She's my mother." Poirot blinked. It was not shock, but confirmation. "I never speak of her," Iris continued. "She left when I was 10. Viola told everyone she'd gone mad, or that she ran off with a violinist in Paris. The truth is, she was forced to leave. Harold made it so. And when she tried to come back, he buried her name." Poirot sat forward, hands folded. "And Gregory? He found her 3 months ago. Somehow, through old letters or contacts, I'm not sure. But he met her. He said she had something. Documents Harold had locked away. Something that proved the whole empire was built on manipulation. She didn't want money. She wanted clarity, her name back, a trace in the family history." "Why did Gregory care?" Poirot asked. "Because he hated Harold. Because Harold ruined him. He wanted revenge, and she gave him a way to get it." Poirot tilted his head slightly. "And what did you want, Iris?" She looked at him then, for the first time, not as a suspect, but as a daughter. "I wanted her to stay gone. I wanted the lie to hold. I'd already spent a decade shaping myself around the absence. Viola raised me, yes, but always like a china figure on display, curated, poised. If the real story came out, I wouldn't just lose the family name. I'd lose the only version of myself I ever managed to protect." Poirot said nothing for a long moment. The shadows deepened along the edges of the walls. "You confronted Gregory, didn't you?" he asked at last. She nodded. "The night before he died. I begged him to stop. I told him he didn't understand what it would cost. Not just Viola. Me, everyone." "Did he threaten you?" "No. Worse, he pitied me. Said I'd inherited my father's cowardice." Poirot rose quietly and walked toward the window. The moon had begun its slow rise, carving a silver line across the glass. Behind him, Iris remained still. "You didn't kill him," Poirot said softly. "But someone did. And you know who." She didn't answer, but her silence was heavy. Her hands, folded in her lap, trembled faintly. "You saw the woman after the murder, didn't you?" "I saw her leaving the east wing, scarf pulled low, just before the scream. I knew, but I couldn't speak. Not then, not with everything collapsing." Poirot returned to his seat, voice calm. "She is still here, somewhere. Yes, she never left the property. She said she would wait for the right moment. I think she thought she'd take the fall for it. She said it would be fitting. One lie buried by another." Poirot's eyes closed briefly. "Ah, and now it is time to unbury them all." He stood once more, and with a quiet bow to Iris, left the room. The confrontation had happened. Not in shouting, not in violence, but in the unspooling of a silence long held in place by guilt and fear. Now the truth had shape. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape Heath's storm that had settled over Windward Court was no longer in the sky. It lived now inside the walls. The air had grown close, suffocating, as though the very architecture recoiled from what it was about to reveal. Poirot moved through the manor like a shadow among ghosts, quiet, deliberate, watching the players on this unraveling stage. He had set the pieces carefully. Now the pressure of truth was beginning to press on those who had nowhere left to retreat. And when people could no longer hide, they ran. It was just past midnight when the attempt came. The house had gone still, save for the soft groan of old wood adjusting to the changing temperature. Poirot, seated in the library, with only a single candle lit beside him, had not yet retired. He sat as though waiting not just for sleep, but for inevitability. And then came the sound, a door closing to quickly, somewhere near the back staircase. Footsteps, fast but careful. Poirot stood without haste and followed. He moved like water down the corridor, every step silent. As he turned the corner near the east wing, he saw Miss Lennox, dressed in a plain traveling coat, clutching a thin parcel wrapped in brown paper and bound with string. She didn't see him. She was already through the servants' door and into the rear garden, her shoes sinking slightly in the damp grass. Poirot followed at a measured pace, not to catch her in flight, but to let her flight confirm what he already suspected. She reached the small greenhouse at the edge of the property, where the family once kept medicinal herbs. It had long since fallen into disuse. She entered without hesitation. Poirot stepped to the side of the door and waited. There was a metallic sound from inside, a scraping, followed by the soft clink of glass. Then silence. He knocked once, softly. "Mademoiselle Lennox," he said, "you will not find freedom in a bottle, or in fire, or in running." Inside, there was a pause. Then the door opened. She stood there, pale, breathing hard, her eyes rimmed with tears that had not yet fallen. "I wasn't going to hurt myself," she said quietly. "I was going to destroy it." Poirot looked past her into the dim interior. On a rusted shelf beside an overturned potting tray sat the brown parcel, now open. Inside were several old documents, letters, diagrams, signatures. Atop them, a glass bottle of kerosene and a box of matches. "Then you admit it exists," Poirot said gently, stepping inside. "The original agreements, the letter, perhaps even the notes from Gregory's final meeting with the unregistered guest." Miss Lennox nodded once, barely. "I kept them for her, for Iris's mother. She asked me to hold them in case something happened." And then Sharp came. He wanted to use them, threatened Lady Viola, bring everything to light. Poirot folded his hands. "But you didn't tell anyone." "I was afraid. Not of Gregory. Of what would happen to the family. To Iris, everything would fall apart. You tried to protect the house," Poirot said softly, "even when it no longer deserved protection." Her shoulders slumped. "I told her not to come. I begged her not to confront Gregory alone. But she said she couldn't bear the silence anymore." "Did she kill him?" "I don't know," she whispered, "but she was the last person to see him alive. And when she came to me, she said only, 'It's done.'" Poirot looked again at the papers. "May I?" She nodded. He carefully lifted a page-typed correspondence between Harold Whitcomb and a shipping broker in Morocco, dated 1928. It discussed falsified transfer records, hidden royalties, and an offshore trust in Evelyn Merrow's name. Without her knowledge, it was not merely shady. It was criminal. "This is what Gregory discovered," Poirot said, "and this is what Harold buried. Perhaps even what Viola tried to ignore." Miss Lennox turned away. "You'll have to tell them." Poirot looked at her, not unkindly. "No, mademoiselle." "You will." She turned back, startled. Poirot nodded. "You were the steward of secrets. It is only fitting that you be the one to let them go. But not with fire, with truth." Outside, the moon had climbed higher, casting a silver glow across the greenhouse glass. It refracted over the broken jars, the dried roots, the dust, and in that light, Miss Lennox seemed to age and soften all at once, as though finally stepping out of the role she had performed for far too long. Poirot took the documents and extinguished the candle. "Come," he said gently. It is time for all of Windward Court to hear what has been whispered in the walls for decades. No more hiding, no more fear. As they stepped out into the damp grass, the sky above them shimmered with stars. The desperate flight had been halted. The truth, long smothered, had begun to breathe again. And Poirot knew the final picture was almost complete. Only one face remained in shadow. And it, too, would soon come into the light. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape Heath's storm that had settled over Windward Court was no longer in the sky. It lived now inside the walls. The air had grown close, suffocating, as though the very architecture recoiled from what it was about to reveal. Poirot moved through the manor like a shadow among ghosts, quiet, deliberate, watching the players on this unraveling stage. He had set the pieces carefully. Now the pressure of truth was beginning to press on those who had nowhere left to retreat. And when people could no longer hide, they ran. It was just past midnight when the attempt came. The house had gone still, save for the soft groan of old wood adjusting to the changing temperature. Poirot, seated in the library with only a single candle lit beside him, had not yet retired. He sat as though waiting not just for sleep, but for inevitability. And then came the sound, a door closing to quickly, somewhere near the back staircase. Footsteps, fast but careful. Poirot stood without haste and followed. He moved like water down the corridor, every step silent. As he turned the corner near the east wing, he saw Miss Lennox, dressed in a plain traveling coat, clutching a thin parcel wrapped in brown paper and bound with string. She didn't see him. She was already through the servants' door and into the rear garden, her shoes sinking slightly in the damp grass. Poirot followed at a measured pace, not to catch her in flight, but to let her flight confirm what he already suspected. She reached the small greenhouse at the edge of the property, where the family once kept medicinal herbs. It had long since fallen into disuse. She entered without hesitation. Poirot stepped to the side of the door and waited. There was a metallic sound from inside, a scraping, followed by the soft clink of glass. Then silence. He knocked once, softly. "Mademoiselle Lennox," he said, "you will not find freedom in a bottle, or in fire, or in running." Inside, there was a pause. Then the door opened. She stood there, pale, breathing hard, her eyes rimmed with tears that had not yet fallen. "I wasn't going to hurt myself," she said quietly. "I was going to destroy it." Poirot looked past her into the dim interior. On a rusted shelf beside an overturned potting tray sat the brown parcel, now open. Inside were several old documents, letters, diagrams, signatures. Atop them, a glass bottle of kerosene and a box of matches. "Then you admit it exists," Poirot said gently, stepping inside. "The original agreements, the letter, perhaps even the notes from Gregory's final meeting with the unregistered guest." Miss Lennox nodded once, barely. "I kept them for her, for Iris's mother. She asked me to hold them in case something happened." And then Sharp came. He wanted to use them, threatened Lady Viola, bring everything to light. Poirot folded his hands. "But you didn't tell anyone." "I was afraid." "Not of Gregory, of what would happen to the family. To Iris, everything would fall apart. You tried to protect the house," Poirot said softly, "even when it no longer deserved protection." Her shoulders slumped. "I told her not to come. I begged her not to confront Gregory alone. But she said she couldn't bear the silence anymore." "Did she kill him?" "I don't know," she whispered. "But she was the last person to see him alive. And when she came to me, she said only, 'It's done.'" Poirot looked again at the papers. "May I?" She nodded. He carefully lifted a page-typed correspondence between Harold Whitcomb and a shipping broker in Morocco, dated 1928. It discussed falsified transfer records, hidden royalties, and an offshore trust in Evelyn Merrow's name. Without her knowledge, it was not merely shady, it was criminal. This is what Gregory discovered, Poirot said. And this is what Harold buried. Perhaps even what Viola tried to ignore. Miss Lennox turned away. You'll have to tell them. Poirot looked at her, not unkindly. No, mademoiselle. You will. She turned back, startled. Poirot nodded. You were the steward of secrets. It is only fitting that you be the one to let them go. But not with fire. With truth, outside. The moon had climbed higher, casting a silver glow across the greenhouse glass. It refracted over the broken jars, the dried roots, the dust, and in that light, Miss Lennox seemed to age and soften all at once, as though finally stepping out of the role she had performed for far too long. Poirot took the documents and extinguished the candle. Come, he said gently. It is time for all of Windward Court to hear what has been whispered in the walls for decades. No more hiding, no more fear. As they stepped out into the damp grass, the sky above them shimmered with stars. The desperate flight had been halted. The truth, long smothered, had begun to breathe again. And Poirot knew the final picture was almost complete. Only one face remained in shadow, and it, too, would soon come into the light. The shadows in Windward Court could no longer hide it. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into Placide following morning broke gray and low, the kind of sky that pressed down gently upon the earth as though warning it not to rise too quickly. Windward Court awoke slowly, with quiet footsteps and fewer words, after the events of the previous night, the attempted destruction of the documents, Miss Lennox's confession, and the surfacing of the long-buried agreements. No one in the house could deny that the old order had fractured. Still, something lingered, an absence. One question remained unanswered, and Poirot, more than anyone, felt its shape like a missing tile in a nearly complete mosaic. He spent the early part of the morning in solitude, seated by the window of the blue drawing room, where the morning light filtered faintly through sheer curtains and played soft tricks with shadow. Spread across the table before him were the recovered documents, Evelyn's sketchbook, the now infamous guest ledger, and a single folded page retrieved from the ashes of the music room fireplace, the one bearing Iris's handwriting. These were not just clues, he thought. They were confessions, some unspoken, some whispered, some burned in the hope that memory might not survive paper. What haunted Poirot now was not the motive. Motive had grown clear. It was opportunity. Each suspect had been accounted for, each piece of the puzzle placed neatly on the board. And yet, one figure remained blurred at the edges. The woman, Iris's mother, the unregistered guest. Poirot had never seen her. No one had admitted to her presence openly, not even Evelyn. Her existence had remained a suggestion, a rumor caught between the lines of memory and guilt. But she had been real. Of that, he was now certain. She had come. She had spoken to Gregory Sharp, and she had vanished. At 10:30. He requested the presence of Miss Evelyn Marrow in the study. She arrived promptly, her face composed but tired, the faintest smear of charcoal still clinging to the edge of one thumb. She seated herself across from Poirot and folded her hands in her lap. You knew she was here, didn't you? Poirot began gently. Iris's mother, Evelyn nodded. Yes, I knew the moment I saw the scarf in the corridor. She used to wear one just like it, even in the summer. Viola said it was a nervous habit, always needing to hide her throat. She came to you. Evelyn hesitated. Briefly. She didn't ask for help. She asked for time. Said she only wanted to speak to Gregory, to retrieve something he had, then she would go. And did she? She never returned to me. Poirot stood and walked slowly to the window, folding his hands behind his back. Mademoiselle, the documents proved that Harold's empire was built on fraud, that Iris's mother had been removed not because of scandal, but because she knew too much. Gregory intended to use this truth, but you knew the truth as well. You chose not to act. I was afraid, Evelyn said. We all were, Poirot turned to face her. Not all. That afternoon, Poirot called for Iris. She came willingly, her posture more upright than the day before, as if something within her had begun to harden. She sat opposite Poirot with a quiet strength, meeting his eyes without flinching. "Your mother," Poirot said softly, "was seen leaving the study moments before Gregory's body was found." Iris said nothing. She was never seen again, not leaving the house, not by the staff, not in the registry, which means she never left the estate at all. Still, Iris said nothing. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. Poirot leaned forward. "She is here, somewhere, hiding, perhaps, protected, or no longer able to be found." Iris's lips parted, but no sound came. Her eyes dropped, then closed. "She came to say goodbye," she whispered, "to me, not just to Gregory." "What happened after she left your room?" "I don't know," she said. She said she had given Gregory the last letter, the original draft Harold's signature. She said it would end with that. Poirot nodded. "But it didn't." "No," Iris said, "because Gregory wasn't trying to make peace. He was planning to expose it all, not just Harold's legacy, but everyone tied to it. Viola, even me." Poirot was silent for a long moment. Then he said, very softly, "And so someone stopped him." Iris looked up slowly. "Yes." Her voice held no panic, no hesitation, only the quiet gravity of acceptance. Poirot stood and began pacing the room slowly, his fingers tapping lightly against his sleeve. Only one person had access to the study at that hour. Only one person knew the location of the original letter before Gregory could make use of it. And only one person had been written out of the narrative of this family. For decades, a ghost no longer willing to remain unseen. Iris stood. "You don't understand." "She didn't mean to." "I do not believe it was murder," Poirot interrupted gently. "I believe it was desperation. Gregory threatened her legacy, her child's identity, and the last sliver of peace she had left. He threatened to turn everything she had suffered into a spectacle. She could not allow that." Iris's shoulders fell. "I helped her hide," she admitted. "Afterwards, I told Viola she had left. I told Evelyn not to speak. Lennox kept the papers, but it was me who said she couldn't stay." Poirot came to stand beside her. "And now," Iris whispered, "I don't know where she is." Poirot placed a hand gently on her arm. "Then it is time to find her," because the final piece had not yet fallen into place. But it was close, closer than any of them knew. Chapter 15. The final gathering be mid-afternoon. The sky above Windward Court had turned the color of tarnished silver, and the light slanting through the long windows seemed to deepen the shadows, rather than push them back. Poirot had requested the great hall be prepared, not the drawing room, nor the study, but the hall with its high-beamed ceiling, its pale stone floor, and its long, unused hearth. A place, he said, where truth might echo properly. Chairs were ranged in a half-circle beneath the great bay window, and the family, what remained of it, was summoned. Lady Viola entered first, stiff-backed and hollow-eyed. Her mourning clothes seemed to have grown heavier with each passing day. Evelyn followed, carrying nothing this time, no sketchbook, no shield. She sat near the end, head bowed, hands in her lap. The Colonel stood behind her, arms crossed, jaw tight. Miss Lennox arrived last, not quite meeting anyone's gaze, her face pale but set with resolve. Iris, however, was not yet present. Poirot stood at the center, not behind a desk or table, but an open space, as though to remove any barrier between himself and those he now addressed. His hands were clasped, his expression thoughtful rather than stern. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began gently, "you have all played a part in this story, some knowingly, others less so. You have kept secrets, shared burdens, and carried guilt not your own. And yet, the truth, it waits. It does not dissipate with silence. It only grows heavier until it must fall. The room was still. No one interrupted. Poirot began to walk slowly. Gregory Sharp did not come to Windward Court for social reasons. He came with intent. He had acquired information documents, correspondence, and legal letters that pointed to a fraudulent past, not just of business dealings, but of betrayal, of a woman removed from the family not for madness, as claimed, but because she knew the foundation of Harold Whitcomb's fortune was a lie. Viola stirred in her seat, but said nothing. She was erased. Poirot continued. And her daughter, Mademoiselle Iris, raised without her, shaped in the image of respectability. But the past, Ms. does not disappear. It waits. And when Gregory found this woman, when he learned what she had held onto all these years, he saw an opportunity to strike back, not with violence, but exposure. He turned, now facing Evelyn. You saw the woman, didn't you? Evelyn's voice was soft. Yes, only once. The scarf, the hands. It was her. Iris's mother. Poirot nodded. She entered the house as a guest without name. She met with Sharp. She delivered the original letter, a document with Harold's signature, proving he had falsified offshore accounts and hidden trusts. But Sharp was not interested in discretion. He wanted leverage. She wanted closure. They parted on bitter terms. His gaze shifted to Lennox. You were asked to protect the documents, and you did. But you also tried to burn them when you realized what they could destroy. Miss Lennox nodded. Slowly, Poirot moved now to Lady Viola. And you, madam, you knew. Perhaps not every detail, but you knew your husband's sins. You knew the source of the wealth, the reason for the silence, the ghost in your household. And yet you upheld the fiction. Why? Viola's voice, when it came, was brittle, because everything was built upon it. If we acknowledged the lie, there would be nothing left. Poirot turned slowly. Iris had entered the room. She walked toward the circle and stood, not beside her stepmother, nor behind Poirot, but near the fire. Her arms folded. You found her, Poirot said quietly. Yes, she replied, and I helped her hide. Poirot stepped closer. But where is she now? Iris hesitated. Then she turned toward the corner of the hall, toward the narrow servant's stair hidden behind the paneling. She never left. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then, from the shadows of the doorway, a figure stepped forward, a woman in her late 50s, her posture upright but her face tired, lined by time and silence. She wore no veil, no scarf now, only a simple coat and shoes dusted with earth. Her eyes scanned the room without fear, only finality. Her name, Iris said, is Elodie Whitcomb. My mother. No one spoke. Poirot inclined his head. Madam, welcome home. Elodie looked around the room. I came to end it, she said softly. But Gregory, he would not let go. He wanted more. He wanted pain. Poirot stepped forward gently. You confronted him. You argued. Yes, he threatened Iris, said he'd make her name rot alongside Harold's. I tried to reason with him. What happened in the study? She looked away. He shoved me. I didn't mean to. He fell. He hit his head. The window shattered behind him. I don't remember how. Poirot nodded slowly. It was not murder, but panic. The scene was arranged to look accidental or invisible, and then you disappeared. I went to the old greenhouse, Elodie said. Viola used to keep it locked, but I knew where the key was. Iris brought me food. No one else knew. Silence fell again, deep and full. Poirot turned to the others. Now you see, the lie ended the day she returned. Not because of a crime, but because of what the crime uncovered. He paused. Tomorrow, the authorities will be informed. There will be statements, legal consequences, perhaps. But for tonight, let the truth sit. Let the house breathe it in. No more ghosts. No one argued. As Poirot stepped away from the circle, the fire crackled behind him, and Windward Court, for the first time in years, felt honest. Not whole, but no longer hiding. Chapter 16. The reveal there inside Windward Court had shifted. It was not peace. Exactly, peace does not come so quickly to a place where blood and truth have mingled. But there was a sense of pause, like a great exhale after a long, unreleased breath. The great hall stood silent now, its chairs left slightly askew. The scent of wood smoke lingering where Elodie Whitcomb had stood moments earlier, like a figure summoned from myth. No one had spoken after her final words. They had only watched her go, escorted quietly by Poirot to a room at the far end of the house where she would wait until the morning, until the official steps of the law could be summoned. Not as a criminal, Poirot had insisted, but as a witness, a survivor. Now, in the drawing room, the key figures remained. Lady Viola stood by the window, staring into the gray garden with an expression of detachment, as though even now she refused to see the full shape of her undoing. Evelyn Marrow sat near the fireplace, her hands folded in her lap, eyes steady but red-rimmed. Iris had taken her place in the center armchair, not quite facing anyone, her posture straighter than usual, as though refusing to collapse under the weight of everything she had just revealed. Colonel Montmere stood silently at the back, his role as the house's makeshift sentinel still in place, and Miss Lennox sat with a stillness that resembled surrender, the last of her composure giving way to something quieter and sadder. Poirot entered calmly, hands behind his back, his mustache trimmed so precisely it seemed untouched by the emotional whirlwind, now settling into the floorboards. He took his place by the hearth and waited a moment, letting the room adjust to his presence. Then he began, "Let us be clear, my friends. Gregory Sharp's death was not a cold-blooded murder. It was an accident, yes, but one steeped in a lifetime of deception. His presence here, his confrontation with Elodie, the threats he made, the anger he carried, all of these things were born from a poison long planted. The crime was not the fall. It was everything that came before." He looked toward Lady Viola. Harold Whitcomb built his fortune not simply through business acumen, but through manipulation of partners, of trusts, of people. And you, madam, protected that fortune with silence. Viola turned from the window, her voice dry. There was nothing else. Everything was tied to it. My life, Iris's future. The estate. If it crumbled, we would lose everything. He turned next to Iris. You, mademoiselle, were placed in an impossible position. Your mother returned from exile not to demand anything from you, but to reclaim her voice. You gave her shelter, but you also gave her your silence. You protected her as she once tried to protect you. It is a circle, Nest's pause, a painful, quiet symmetry. Iris nodded once, her throat tightening. Poirot shifted his gaze to Evelyn. You were the soul of this house once, mademoiselle, the moral compass that Harold discarded. You remained close, but always in shadow. It was not cowardice. It was grief. You mourned a man who never deserved the loyalty you gave him. You already had, Poirot said gently. You lost your husband to lies. You lost your stepdaughter's trust. And now you risk losing your legacy not because of truth, but because you feared it. He turned next to Iris. You, mademoiselle, were placed in an impossible position. Your mother returned from exile not to demand anything from you, but to reclaim her voice. You gave her shelter, but you also gave her your silence. You protected her as she once tried to protect you. It is a circle, Nest's pause, a painful, quiet symmetry. Iris nodded once, her throat tightening. Poirot shifted his gaze to Evelyn. You were the soul of this house once, mademoiselle, the moral compass that Harold discarded. You remained close, but always in shadow. It was not cowardice. It was grief. You mourned a man who never deserved the loyalty you gave him. Evelyn blinked, but did not speak. Poirot looked lastly at Lennox. You were the keeper of the past, the ledger of sins. And when the moment came to preserve the truth or bury it, you chose both. You kept the documents, but you hid them. You did not destroy them, because something in you believed the truth should win. Even if it took time. Lennox lowered her head. Poirot stepped back and clasped his hands again. Gregory Sharp was not a noble man, but he saw the rot and tried, in his own vengeful way, to expose it. He met with Elodie, demanded access to the original agreements, and threatened to drag every name through the mud. In the confrontation that followed, he fell, a wound to the head, no blood spilled deliberately, no weapon raised, and yet, guilt lingered. He paused, and so, Elodie hid. With the help of her daughter, the body was discovered not long after. The study rearranged, the window broken possibly in the struggle, possibly by Sharp's own fall. The rest of you, confused and complicit in various degrees, responded in kind. Some with fear, some with lies, some with silence. Poirot let the words settle. No one moved. "This is the truth," he said softly. "Not simple, not tidy, but complete." Viola's voice broke the stillness. "What happens now?" Poirot looked at her. "Now, the authorities are summoned. Statements are given. Not to punish, necessarily, but to confirm. To ensure clarity. No one else must carry the weight of this in secret. And my mother?" Iris asked. Poirot turned to her. "She will be heard. She will speak at last. Whether the world forgives her is not ours to decide. But we will no longer pretend she does not exist." The fire crackled faintly, a quiet accompaniment to the closing of an era. Poirot glanced at his pocket watch and then tucked it away. "The worst of crimes," he said at last, "is not always the one committed in the moment. It is the one that festers in silence, reshaping lives in its shadow." He bowed slightly, then walked from the room, and behind him, Windward Court, for the first time in decades, began to feel real. Not spotless, not grand dot, but true. Chapter 17, Outcome, and Justice Serene returned to Windward Court the next morning, gentle and persistent, like a benediction washing over the house. The grounds, once crisp with frost and guarded by silence, now seemed to breathe again. Damp earth softened the weight of footsteps, and the stone paths that led through the east gardens glistened under the gray sky. It was not the stormy rain of earlier days, nor the sharp downpours that had preceded the murder, but a quiet, steady rhythm, as though nature itself had chosen to acknowledge what had passed and what must come next. Poirot rose early. His suitcase had been neatly packed, his shoes polished to a mirror finish, and his tie selected with care navy, with a thin silver stripe. Outside his window, the ivy clung to the stone like a memory too deep to uproot. The events of the past days had concluded not with a grand arrest or a shouted confession, but with the slow unspooling of a truth long deferred. Yet there was still a final reckoning to arrange. Justice, Poirot often said, is not only the concern of law, it is the restoration of balance. And today, he would see that balance set right by 10 o'clock. The local constable had arrived, summoned not with urgency, but with care. Poirot met him in the study, where Gregory Sharp had fallen, where so many answers had once seemed impossible. The officer was young and serious, his eyes scanning the room as if unsure what remained to solve. Poirot explained everything in measured tones. He did not dramatize. He presented the facts as he had gathered them. How Elodie Whitcomb, in a confrontation laced with emotion and fear, had pushed Gregory Sharp during an argument, not intending to kill, but reacting in instinct. How Sharp had struck his head on the corner of the heavy writing desk. How Elodie, stunned and disoriented, had left the study, later helped into hiding by her daughter, Iris. How the others, Viola, Evelyn, Lennox, each, in their own way, had chosen not to uncover the truth, but to preserve it, as they had preserved so many other secrets over the years. The constable, to his credit, listened carefully, He took notes. He asked no unnecessary questions. Poirot handed over the documents, the original agreements, the forged trusts, the threatening letters, all the paper trail that had led Gregory Sharp to his final confrontation. "She's in the garden room," Poirot said gently. "She'll come quietly, but speak to her with dignity. She has spent too long living without it." The constable nodded and left. Poirot remained behind. He sat for a long time at the desk, the room unchanged since the day he had first examined it. The glass in the east window had been repaired again, this time with care. The rug had been cleaned, the bloodstain removed. And yet, even now, Poirot could feel the echo of violence in the stillness. Not the act of death, but the violence of silence, of omission, of generations protecting myths at the cost of the living. Around noon, Lady Viola requested a private word. She was waiting in the blue drawing room, standing beside a side table where an untouched cup of tea had grown cold. Poirot entered, bowed politely, and waited. Viola turned slowly, her face drawn, but steadier than before. "What happens now?" she asked. Poirot's voice was kind. "Elodie will give her statement. She will not be imprisoned, I believe. The death was accidental, and the surrounding truths the financial forgeries. The buried agreements will be handled quietly. It is not in the Crown's interest to embarrass the legacy of Harold Whitcomb more than necessary." Viola nodded, but her eyes were far away. "The house will be sold, the estate divided. There will be nothing left." Poirot tilted his head. "And yet, madam, for the first time, there is honesty. That, I think, is worth more." She gave a brittle smile. "Truth has always been expensive." Poirot nodded. "Yes, but lies often charge interest." Later that afternoon, Evelyn approached Poirot in the conservatory, where he was taking his final tea before departure. She stood beside a pot of withering orchids, her voice quiet. "I've decided to leave," she said. "Iris offered me a room in London. I may go back to teaching, or something quieter." Poirot looked up with a warm smile. "You have carried grief for too long, mademoiselle. It is time, perhaps, to carry something lighter." She nodded. "And you?" "I returned to London. There is always another question waiting." Before dusk, Poirot stood once more at the edge of the east garden. Iris joined him, hands tucked into the pockets of her coat. "I don't know what happens next," she said softly. "You begin," Poirot said. "And my mother? She will speak her truth, and then she will live perhaps not as she once was, but as she now chooses." They stood in silence for a while, listening to the rain. Poirot turned, adjusting his coat. "You have a strong mind, Mademoiselle Whitcomb. And now, finally, you have your name. Not borrowed, not hidden." She looked at him. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot, for seeing what others chose not to." Poirot bowed slightly. "It is the little gray cells, mademoiselle, but also the heart." As he walked away down the gravel path, the clouds began to thin. The sky remained gray, but a pale silver light touched the edges of the roofline. Windward Court, cracked and wounded, remained behind him, not as it was, but as it must now be, no longer haunted. Just honest. Chapter 18, the closing remark a week later. Hercule Poirot sat aboard the 12:10 train bound for London, a cup of strong black coffee steady in his hand despite the gentle rhythm of the carriage. Outside the window, the countryside blurred in green and gray hills soft with mist, fences leaning with time. The case at Windward Court was over. No press had come sniffing, no scandal had erupted in the society pages. It had ended with restraint, with quiet dignity, and Poirot had ensured it. There had been no need for fanfare. Some truths, after all, are not meant for the public theater. They are meant to restore balance within the private heart. Elodie Whitcomb had given her statement to the authorities with calm resolution. The coroner's report confirmed the fall had been fatal, but unpremeditated. the head injury consistent with an impact against the desk's edge. There were no bruises, no signs of restraint or aggression. The official record stated that Gregory Sharp had died after a confrontation concerning personal and historical family disputes. Elodie was not charged. She was allowed to leave quietly, escorted by Iris, her future uncertain, but hers at last to shape. Lady Viola had withdrawn from public life. Windward Court, as she had said, was to be sold, but not in haste. There were matters to settle: legal, financial, emotional. She did not resist the change. In fact, Poirot suspected she welcomed the final collapse. To live for so long in the preservation of a fiction was exhausting. Letting go, for her, was an act of survival. Iris had written Poirot a short letter the morning he departed, neatly folded, unsigned. "Thank you for giving us the truth, not in pieces, but whole. She is resting now, not in exile, not in hiding, just resting, and I think I can finally begin. Yours, I. Miss Lennox had resigned from the estate service. No destination was listed. Evelyn Marrow, true to her word, had accepted Iris's invitation to return to London. The past, she said, might never leave, but it needn't lead anymore." Poirot sipped his coffee, watching the fields drift past. The case had been unlike others. No blood-stained weapon, no theatrical confession, no criminal mastermind cackling in the dark. Only history, wounds passed down and covered over. One silence layered atop another until even the house itself had forgotten how to speak. It reminded him, in some quiet way, of something his old friend Hastings had once said long ago, over brandy in a hotel bar after a case that had nearly broken them both. "You know, Poirot, not every mystery ends with justice. Sometimes all you get is the truth, and you must make peace with that." Poirot had disagreed then, but now he was not so certain. As the train rocked gently into the next county, Poirot opened his small notebook and turned to the final page. He wrote, in his careful script, "Case, the affair at Windward Court. Motive, legacy, silence. Protection. Method, accidental death following confrontation. Resolution, truth restored. Justice of a gentler sort delivered." Then, with a small smile, he closed the notebook and slipped it into his coat pocket. He leaned back, letting the soft rhythm of the tracks lull his thoughts into quiet. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, and inside, Hercule Poirot allowed himself for the first time in many days to rest.